Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody. Before we get into the issue, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is the free version of the podcast. And all that means is that this is far behind where I'm at in the Patreon version. So if you're liking this and you need more John Constantine, you can't get enough, be sure to go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, which gives you access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've done so far, and a new Hellblazer podcast every week. And you'll also get the exclusives from our main Planes, Trains, and Comic Books podcast. So if any of that interests you, definitely check out our Patreon at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word. And with that, let's get into the issue. Today, we are reading Hellblazer number 21. And just a little recap of what's been going on. Currently, we are smack dab in the middle of the Fear Machine story arc, where John Constantine is battling a inner group of Freemasons, like there's the bigger group, and then the smaller group of people that are more inclined to try to get political power by using demons and whatnot in the occult. So John is on their trail because they have built a machine called the Fear Machine. And what the Fear Machine does is it takes the earth energy through ley lines, which are kind of power centers of the earth. And they've been taking fear from mental patients and using these ley lines as a conduit to attack certain areas or just put fear in certain parts of the country in order to make them vote a certain way or act in a certain way, like rioting if they want to scare a certain voting base and say, oh, look at these people rioting. They could do that, and then the people they want to vote against the rioters would vote for them. But the Freemasons need psychics to drive the machine and direct the fear where they want it. And one of these psychics just happened to be a little girl named Mercury, who is friends with John Constantine, and they kidnapped her for this project. So he is on the trail to get her back. And where we left off in the last issue was Constantine was trying to figure out more information about these Freemasons in order to fight them. And he had just barely escaped a police raid where he and a bunch of other people that have been affected by the Fear Machine were kind of meeting to try to figure out how to take it down. And the police who are working for the Masons raided it, and John was able to escape, but everybody else was rounded up. We also found out last issue that there is a man named Webster who was supposedly working for the Freemasons and like just following orders and stuff. But it turns out he is actually like a priest who's trying to bring in this fear monster that is growing inside the Fear Machine into our reality. So that is where we left off. First things first, we got the cover here. This cover was really striking to me, actually, because it reminds me of the mother of Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. I think her name is Genova. Basically, it looks like an amalgamation of a couple different people, and then there's like Medusa hair on this body, and tentacles and snakes coming out from everywhere. It's very creepy looking. And in the background, we can see a ghostly figure of John Constantine staring at a skull. And this issue is written by Jamie Delano. It's drawn by Mark Buckingham with inks by Alfredo Alcala. And we start on the first page with the Freemason director of the Fear Machine project walking into the Fear Machine area, and he's calling for Webster. He's like, Webster, are you here? And he looks up, and in the middle of this fake stone circle, there is a gallows, or it's a single gallows. I don't know. It's not multiple, but it's one noose hanging from a wooden structure that is going to hang people. But Webster isn't really, surprised by that. I guess that was part of the machine itself. But then as he gets closer, he realizes, wait a second, there is some kind of altar with 4 decapitated heads kind of plunged onto the top of it. And Webster recognizes the people as the mental patients that they had been keeping in the facility to fuel the Fear Machine. And it is very apparent the director didn't know anything about this part of it, because he screams, what have you done? You've killed them. And I guess Webster was there off screen, but he is the evil guy who like the Freemasons thought was working for him, but he's actually like a priest or acolyte of this fear demon that's been growing in the machine. And the director continues, I've had word from the lodge. The Grand Master has ordered all operations aborted. And Webster's like, abort? Abort, fools! How can I abort the rebirthing of the Godhead when he already writhes rising in our fear and blood? And this is a super creepy panel. He's got in his hands a bunch of intestines and offal and a bunch of, body parts that are supposed to be on the inside of someone. And he's just kind of like playing with them or strewing them around this faux stone circle. And he's got this super creepy, evil look on his face. And then we cut to John, who is on the road with his buddy Chaz. They are driving from London to Scotland, and Chaz is not happy about that. he says to John, "Look, John, what's going on? I know I owe you, but there are limits. Do you know how far it is from London to Scotland?" And they haven't really gone into Chaz and John's history in this book yet, but the back and forth between them is pretty funny because whenever Chaz gets angry, John just kind of is able to placate him, and then he continues being his friend and doing what John wants him to do. So in response to Chaz's outburst, he says, "Tell you what, after this, we're quits, all right?" And then Chaz is like, "You mean it? Thanks, John." And then John rolls down the window and he sticks his hand out because it started to rain, but he said he's thinking the rain looks different than normal. And as he brings it back in, he realizes, wait a second, it is raining blood right now. And as he looks at his hands, he says, "I don't suppose there'll be much call for taxis from now on, because I think this is probably the end of the world as we know it. It's coming, you know, the God of all gods." And that is actually the name of this issue as well. So then we cut to the end of the last issue, which, if you recall, John was in the library researching the Masonic traditions and Freemasons and stuff. And it was right as Webster performed the first decapitation ritual and killed the little boy mental patient. And that murder sent out a big fear wave that hit through all of Great Britain. It affected John, Marge, who was in Scotland, and Mercury, who has just escaped from the mental institution that the Masons were holding her in. So this psychic wave kind of gets John to realize that, you know, maybe I shouldn't be reading books. Maybe I need to actually go out there and get firsthand information. So he goes outside to use the phone, where he calls a phone number, and it's the number that he got while he was pretending to be a policeman in the last issue when his friends were being rounded up. And when he calls the number, he finds out that it is the number of the parliamentary undersecretary. So someone high up in the government, I assume. And the person on the phone is nice enough to let John know that the undersecretary has left for his club. So now John has a location to go to where he can meet this undersecretary. And when he sees the man coming out of the club, John realizes that he knows this guy. John says, "I haven't got many friends in the government, but last time I saw the news, the parliamentary understudy at the Home Office was Bartholomew Carter Brown. I knew him a good few years ago when he was in the diplomatic service. The silly bleeder had given himself a bit of a fright, playing naughty voodoo games with a daughter of a Haitian envoy. He'd claimed she turned into a crocodile when they were having sex. Or was it a dragon? I hypnotized him and got it all on tape somewhere." So John approaches the man and he says, "I want to know everything, Binky. I want to know everything." And I guess Binky is the nickname that John gave for him. And Binky is surprised to see John. He's like, what are you doing here? I don't understand. I'm late for an appointment." And John, of course, doesn't leave it at that. So he's like, "Hey, you know what? I'll walk with you and we can talk a bit until you get there." So in John's research when he was in the library, I guess he found out what the name of the Freemason inner circle was called. So he confronts Binky straight away and he says, "The Magi Caicus are the closed inner circle of the Freemasonry. At a guess, they probably claim a tradition going back through Solomon to Atlantis, and you're one of them." And Binky is very surprised and kind of scared. He's like, how do you know?" And John looks down and grabs his hand and is like, "Hey, you're wearing a ring that has the insignia on it. Wasn't that hard to figure out if you know what you're looking for?" So John basically says, like, "Look, I want you to give me everything you know about this society." And Binky's like, "No, I can't, because they'll destroy me. My career will be completely ruined. And as it is, it was a bloodbath at Parliament today. They're clearing us all out. We were so close, but we lost control. And now we must withdraw again and wait." So to convince Binky to talk, John lets him know that he has that recording still of him confessing to having sex with a crocodile woman. But even with that, Binky's not persuaded. So John pulls out the big guns and says, "But how if I let it be known that it was you who betrayed them, Binky? You who told me about Jala Cantilliocan." And at the mention of that name, Binky gets very scared and is like, "How did you know that name?" And at that, Binky kind of gives up and just starts talking. And basically he tells John that the inner circle of Freemasons that he's a part of was planning to use this fear machine in order to create a new world order with them as the ruling class. So that answers the political side to it. But John, he knows there's a magical component to it too. So he's like, there's more to it. Where do the ley lines fit in? What is the GOAG? And Binky's like, I don't understand it. I'm only at the 13th degree. But the GOAG is the God of all gods, the true and only God who is the God of all men. You said his secret name before. I don't know anymore. Such things are not my concern. I'm not a priest. I'm a bureaucrat, an administrator. But John is able to kind of coax him to talking more. And Binky says, It's some kind of psychic weaponry. I think the idea was to enhance the areas of unrest across the country by projecting fear through the channels in the ground. The last reports were that Geotronics had acquired some psychic girl and they were making dramatic progress when the fools let her escape. And when John hears that, he's very excited and surprised. He's like, wait, she escaped? And Binky replies, it's immaterial now. They'll have been shut down with everything else. And John says, so that's it? The end of the story? Just like that? You can't just shrug off something as big as this, you know. What about all the people you've sucked in? And Binky says, oh, there'll be more resignations, suicides, a few arrests. Some of us may go down for treason. It'll all get covered up. I have to leave you here and see what course the lodge has charted for me. And it seems that Binky has arrived at his destination, and as we zoom out, we see that Binky is walking into Buckingham Palace. And John, not realizing that that is where Binky is going, is like, hey, you can't go in there. But Binky just goes right past the guard who lets him through and, of course, steps in front of John's way. And that's when John realizes just how far and powerful of a reach that this sect of Freemasons has. And John narrates, Binky wasn't joking. It went right to the top. Like I said, though, you can't isolate conspiracies. When it comes down to it, a bloke might as well just head for the hills. And that's where we would have picked up where Chaz picks him up in the taxi and is driving him to Scotland, where we picked up at the beginning of the issue. And then we cut to Mercury, who is now on her own. She has left Dr. Fulton, and he is dead now. And she has been trying to get back to Marge, and all she knows is that Marge, her mom, is somewhere in the north in the Scotland area. And she has gone into a roadside diner because, you know, she's hungry while she's on the run or whatever. And she's having issues kind of dealing with visions that she's been having of fear stuff, like nightmares and whatnot. So it says, nothing is real anymore. They let it out and she had helped them. Now she's stuck in the nightmare. All she can do is try to ignore it. Keep going north and hope that maybe sometime she can do something to help make it right. And while the narration is saying that, she's like, she had ordered spaghetti, and then when she gets it and sits down, she sees the woman who brings it to her is kind of like a Medusa. And when Mercury looks down at the spaghetti as she's about to eat it, she sees the plate is full of a bunch of little baby snakes. So, of course, that kind of dampens her appetite. And as she kind of pushes the spaghetti away, she hears someone familiar who happens to walk in. But John, Constantine, and Chaz, they're taking a break from their road trip. And as John is talking to Chaz, he turns around and he sees Mercury. And when he realizes it's her, he's like, oh my God, Mercury, it's me, John. And he kind of runs to her and they have like a big hugging moment as she sees him as well. And it's funny because Chaz doesn't know who she is or what she looks like. So he just sees John run to this little girl, this like 13-year-old or whatever, and like hug her and then like sit her down at a table and like be affectionate to her. And he's like, hey, John, I want to lay off the jail bait. Like, I don't know if we should attract attention to ourselves, if you know what I mean. But then John introduces them and, you know, it's all cleared up. And then we cut back to the Fear Machine where we find the compatriots of John Constantine that were kidnapped and arrested in the last issue by the faux police that are working for the Freemasons. And they are being held in like a little jail cell that is right next to the sacrifice table inside the Fear Machine area where the faux stone circle is located. And the prisoners who are there are Sergei, the Russian agent who is trying to steal the Fear Machine secrets. We have Simon, the journalist who was trying to uncover what was going on with the like technological side of the project, like geotronics and the ley lines and whatnot. And then we have Inspector Talbot, who had stumbled into the government side of the corruption with the Freemasons and how they were misusing police in order to have their own police squad that would do their bidding. So those are the three main friends of John that were like trying to help him figure out what was going on with this conspiracy. But there are also two other people in this cell, and they are the owners of the hotel that John was staying at. And their names are Ken and Hal. I haven't mentioned them too much, but they're in the book, but they've been kind of like comedy relief or just like a snarky little couple that would be annoying to John or to kind of like talk bad about John behind his back while he was staying at their hotel. So I guess because John was at their hotel, they got brought in as like co-conspirators with Inspector Talbot, Simon, and Sergei. And Ken and Hal seem to be a little bit more freaked out than everybody else. They are definitely the most unaware party to what's been going on because they weren't part of this at all. They were just running a bed and breakfast and somehow got rounded up. And so they're kind of freaking out like, why are we here? They happen to be a gay couple, so they're like, I mean, is it because we're gay? Is this what the magazines were saying? They're going to put gays in concentration camps. Do they think we have AIDS? And Simon, who is also gay, kind of reaches out to them and says, hey, it's not because we're gay. It's because this whole other thing's been going on in the background that you have no idea about. And then Talbot and Sergei begin to talk as well about what's going on. Sergei, knowing what the fear machine is and stuff, like the magical side of it, he's saying, you know, this is a terror engine, this is the fear machine, and it's kind of like a supernatural device. And Talbot, who doesn't believe in any of that magic stuff, he's like, I don't know about that. I only deal in evidence. First off, there are a lot of empty cages here, so they must be expecting more prisoners. Also, these cells are wooden, and there's no facilities, so they're not intending to keep us long. And as he's saying that, we get a pan out of like what's going on outside of their space, and we see that on the altar there are now more heads than just the boys from the last issue. There's 4 more, so there's 5 total of heads that have been mounted on this altar. And these are all people that Webster have killed, and I believe they're all the people that were the mental patients inside of the fear machine facility. And as the inspector's talking, he looks over at that and he goes, I mean, look at those heads. Are they real or some kind of psychological torture? And Sergei's like, oh, they're real, all right. Can't you smell the blood? So it's kind of obvious that Talbot hasn't quite understood, or maybe he's underestimated the danger that they're in. And then someone begins to cry, and Talbot, I guess, thinks that it's Ken, maybe because Talbot is kind of prejudiced against gay people, so he's using like derogatory language towards them and whatnot in this cell. And so he automatically thinks Ken is the one who's crying. So he's like, Ken, for God's sake, stop that bloody awful noise, or so help me, I'll swing for you. And Ken kind of backs away from him. And as he does, he pushes his back into the bars of one of the sides of the cage. And there was another cage next to it. So someone grabs him. And on the hand that grabs him, we see a ring. And Simon recognizes it. He's like, hey, look at the ring. It's him, the one who tried to kill me. So Simon kind of rushes the man along with Talbot, and they are able to secure the man in a headlock through the bars. And it turns out they're wrong. The man who is there is actually the director of the Fear Machine Project, and he has been thrown in here because he was betrayed by Webster as well, who was, unbeknownst to the director, a acolyte of the god that's trying to resurrect itself from inside the Fear Machine. So once Talbot and Simon have the director, they decide that they're going to try to interrogate him, and the director's like, whoa. Look, I didn't want anything to do with you. It was Webster. We all wear that ring, all of the members of the lodge, meaning the Freemasons. I don't know how this happened. I'm not a bad man. I just got suckered in. I trusted them. The lodge got me a promotion to the director of geotronics research with an unlimited budget to work on paranormal weaponry, control of the earth energy through ley lines, that sort of thing. It was Dr. Fulton who understood it all, though, and Webster, of course. I thought I was in charge. And then Sergei asks him, you were trying to use basic emotional energy to fuel the realization of the subconscious mind? And you succeeded? And the director answers, never fully. The fear seemed to get to everyone. A lot killed themselves. The girl was our breakthrough. She had real power, too much for Fulton. I thought we were going to use our fear machine to provoke general unrest, to enable a new political direction. I thought we were ready, but the lodge called it off. But Webster refused to obey. He beat me and he covered me in offal. He says, I will die to feed the God of all gods. And then Ken says, I knew it. I knew they were going to kill us. And as he says that, Webster had walked in and heard like the very end of this conversation, and he goes, you are correct, obviously. You are all going to die here. Beginning now, at regular intervals, your deaths will provide the stimulus to stir the world into a new age of utter liberty. Terror is the key that will breach the gates, and so I cannot spare you that. But please take comfort. The end itself is quick. Your deaths are not wrought for pleasure, but they're necessary for lubrications for a revolution of the eras. The resting time is past. The God is ours again. And as he says that, we see someone else walk in, and it is Davis, the head of the police squad that Webster was using to round people up for sacrifices. So Webster asks him, Davis, what news of our other sacrifices? And Davis says, seems like 2 more vans are on their way, sir. They're full of colors from Birmingham and the peace bitches from Greenham. The other vans have been recalled. And Webster's happy about the news, and he's like, well, let's just start then. So he says to start with the director. So Davis goes to collect him from the cell. And as he's leading the director away, Davis says to Talbot, you'll be the last, Talbot. You'll even have time to write a letter to your wife. And Talbot realizes that it was Davis who sent all those hate mail letters to him. So he yells out, "So it was you, Davis. I tell you this, I may be bound for hell, but you'll be coming with me, I promise you." Then we get to John Constantine, who is now in Scotland. He is with the pagan nation after he has brought Mercury back to her mom, Marge. And the narration says, "So I'm here. This is the pagan nation paradise Marge talked about in every letter. As usual, though, I'm too late to get the benefit of it. It wasn't quite the reunion I would have hoped for. Oh, everyone was real pleased to see us. Well, Mercury at least. Bloody Zed doesn't even remember me. It feels like I'm just hanging on here. Must be time to let go." So as he's thinking this, he's actually talking to Errol, who's telling him what was going on the whole time he was gone. And Errol tells him, "It was the bollocks, John. We had everything. It really felt like home. The Freedom Mob and the Pagan Nation went together great. But that was before the bad weirdness started. And the women were getting their shit together, too. It was exciting here, important. But it's always the same. Whenever it gets feeling happy, disaster." And as they're talking and walking, it seems like they're going somewhere specific, like Errol's trying to show him something. And John asks, "And it happened last night, you say?" And Errol says, "Yeah, there was a storm. We thought lightning had started a fire in the garden. Some of the boys ran to put it out. It was hell, man. Totally unreal." And then we get a panel of what they're staring at, and we can see them from behind looking at this. And what it is there's a bunch of bodies of the men who went out the night before to put out the fire. And there's 2 trees that are just strewn with their bodies, like it's as if the trees attacked them or something. And John asks why they haven't got the bodies down, and Errol says, "Eddie says it's too dangerous to go near. He doused it and the force twisted the rods and broke his arm. It scares me, John. This is heavy shit. Do you think we can beat it?" And John responds, "It's serious magic, Errol. The sort that changes things permanently. It's too late now, I think. It's more of a case of joining it. Go back to the longhouse with the others. I'm going in." So John begins to walk, and as he's narrating, he says, "This is a cold and terrible place. Fierce and furious. A place of death. A place to pass through. Forward, no turning back. I know what it is, but I can't give it a name. I recognize it, remember it, but I don't know how to get it. I wish I had more craft. Mercury told me she could get into the mind world where the terror thing is, through the stone circle. Maybe I can do the same. This is the time. I know this is the time. This is the oldest, most ancient magic. It's life and death. Coiling, winding endlessly through everything. To look on its certain destruction, but I don't think there is a choice. I've got to know. All my life I've lived in a gray sham world, a world with something missing. That world was an illusion, a pale fraud perpetrated by logic. Now it's my chance to penetrate the veil, to cross the threshold into forgottenness." And as he's saying all this, he's like walking to an area near the trees that they were looking at with the dead bodies in them. And there's a river with a water wheel in it, and the water wheel has a person tied to it. And I guess that's why John picks this specific place to pierce the veil, as he put it. It seems like he's maybe just going to the astral plane or something, but I guess he needs the water that's like full of death or something to get there. So he submerges himself in the water, and that's what sends him to the other side. And then we get this really cool double page spread where we see John, like, he's submerging his body and there's bubbles around him and stuff, but then it's like he's floating in space above Britain and the earth because it looks like he's in space or something. And he can see all the ley lines that run all over England, and the lines converge and kind of intersect at certain points that are like represented by dots. And those are the stone circles that like are able to focus the power of the ley lines. And it kind of looks like when someone draws a constellation like the Big Dipper or something, and there's like the dots that are the stars in the sky, and then they just connect them with the lines. So as John's floating above, he says, "My mind floods, immersed in a high soaring recognition of the body of the earth as if pinioned by a web, the ley lines, the stone circles." And then as he's seeing this wondrous sight, all of a sudden, he begins to fall, and it says, "I'm falling at the speed of thought, a black arrow fired from terror's bow." And he is being pulled in by the faux circle of stones at the Fear Machine site. And he says, "This is a place where black deeds are being done. This seething, boiling place." And John can now see what's going on in the sacrifice area of the Fear Machine. And what he sees is Simon is at the gallows. He is about to be sacrificed by Webster. And John yells out his name, "Simon!" And it says, "I scream his name without a voice. He dies. Ritual slaughter. and then Webster pulls the handle that releases the trapdoor of the gallows. So Simon's body falls and he begins to hang, and Webster takes a knife, and as Simon's hanging there, he cuts Simon's belly open and all of his innards fall out, and then he proceeds to cut Simon's head off, and John narrates, "This is deliberate. Primal symbols to summon primal gods. This is the realm of mind, beyond taboo. All horrors may be honored here." And then in the astral plane, John begins to see something appear, and it is the fear demon itself. It is the one that Mercury saw that kind of looks like Akira. It's like a big amalgamation of a bunch of bodies and intestines and mouths and nightmares and everything. And when John sees it, he recognizes it and he says, yes, I know it. Oh, I remember it with the depths of my soul. Humbaba, fortress of intestines, cousin of titans, father of the dragon whose mother is the earth. Show me the true self within your labyrinthine mind. And as this demon kind of reveals itself to him, it's almost as if Constantine begins to like kneel down and bow to it, like in submission or something. And it looks like possibly John has gone too far, like too close to it, and he's going to get like sucked into it. But before that can happen, someone appears next to him, and it is Mercury. And she says, "John, no, come on, it's the terror thing. You have to go back to Marge, or it'll make us part of it. Go now, go." And as her and John return to our reality and the pagan nation and Marge and everything, we see Mercury yell out, "No, let go." And as John and her break into our world, we see that the monster has actually grabbed onto Mercury and followed her into our reality. So it's kind of like Freddy Krueger or whatever. If you grab him in a dream, you can pull him into our reality. Well, that's basically what happened here. And the monster kind of lurches forward, but Mercury says, "Stay! I know you! You are a part of me! Do as I say! You cannot have him nor me, yet! Our time is still to come! We wait for Jala Cantiliokin." And I love this splash page because all the pagans are like, holy shit, as they actually see some real magic, some real demon in their world, and they're confronted by that, and they are horrified by it. And that is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.